Yeah, so just give you a quick...
Yeah, that's
So welcome back, everyone, to part 2 of Ian Crane's wonderful, enlightening talk on what's going on in the geopolitical scene. Ian Crane, everyone.
Okay, so I guess one or two people came back then. Right. Okay, so where do we get to? Fracking hell. Right, let's bring things a bit closer to more recent events, as it were. March the 11th. March the 11th. 3/11. 3/11. Of course, for most people, they remember that as the day of the Madrid bombings. Coincidentally, 3/11/2004, the day of the Madrid bombings, was exactly 911 days after 9/11. There are many, many remarkable patterns to the numbers and dates that these guys follow. That's why they're so predictable. So March the 11th this year. Well, you could say, it's pretty easy to hone in on March the 11th, 2011, 3/11/11 or 11/3/11, depending on how you write your calendar. But there was one particular individual in Australia who pinpointed the events in the Far East to the exact hour. Let me introduce you to that guy. This is the guy, Mitchell Coombs. This is his Facebook page. And I wasn't aware of Mitchell until a few days after the events of March the 11th, which was, of course, the day of the earthquake, tsunami, and the nuclear meltdown at Fukushima. But in the immediate aftermath, somebody drew my attention to Mitchell's Facebook page, because a few days before, on March the 7th, Mitchell, okay everyone, you've been warned what's to come. We now have 104 hours to go. Hold on tight. We are in for the shock of your lives. 104 hours. Here's the time, in Australian time, he was absolutely on the money. A little while later, he posted, so what a great start to the year. Queensland's worst floods in history, Queensland's worst cyclone in history, New Zealand's worst earthquake in its history, a 6.6 earthquake in China on Wednesday, tsunami in Japan later tonight. What's next on the agenda? Tsunami in Japan later tonight. Once again, of course, he was absolutely spot on. And then afterwards, he put, because he was taking a lot of flack, because people were saying, how did you know? What's your secret? And he says, I was correct to the exact hour once again. Just like with the New Zealand earthquake, Cyclone Yasi, and the Queensland floods. You were all warned well in advance. If you did not watch those videos I posted about the Pacific tsunami, that's your own fault. I'll introduce you a little more to Mitchell Coombs a bit later. So what was Mitchell Coombs' secret? What was he looking at? Was this just pure intuition, or was there some insight? Was there a script that he was picking up on? And if it was certainly one that I hadn't picked up on. So I got in touch with Mitchell Coombs and asked him what he was looking at. And he said, it's the Illuminati cards. Anybody heard of the Illuminati cards? Yeah, now this is a game. It's a game that was developed in the 1990s by a guy called Steve Jackson of Steve Jackson Games in Austin, Texas. Now there's some very interesting history here, because Steve Jackson was visited by the CIA in 1990. And although Steve Jackson, you can hear some interviews and discussions with Steve Jackson on the web about that meeting, you're not going to really learn very much. And we'll maybe see what has transpired later. But the Illuminati cards, well, although I was aware of the game, I didn't have a set. But I thought, well, hang on a second, I better start taking a look at these. So what Mitchell said was, he said the first card that drew his attention to the Illuminati cards was actually this. This is from the original set of cards produced in 1995. Steve Jackson actually had another card that was absolutely spot on, because in the original set was a card that had Princess Di. Now, after each event, after each of the events has occurred, the card is removed from the set.
Oh, no.
And there's a lot of cards still to go. So the Princess Di card was removed after August 31st, 1997. And this card, the terrorist nuke card, remarkable similarity, isn't it? And this card, the Pentagon, and this here, I mean, the Pentagon obviously had the, whatever it was that hit the Pentagon, supposedly going in the side of the Pentagon, whereas this one had the explosion coming up from the middle. Well, there's an event that occurred a year before 9/11. This is from a card from a later set that was produced after 97. And this particular card, so this is the original card with the fire coming up from the middle of the Pentagon. And here we have a guy in what looks like a captain's or some uniform of a pilot. Well, on October the 24th, 26th, 2000, the Pentagon ran an exercise, and in this exercise, the exercise was based on what would happen in the event of a plane deliberately being crashed into the middle of the Pentagon. Now the card, the Illuminati card of Steve Jackson's set, predates this exercise. The architect or the scriptwriter for this exercise was a former naval pilot, a Navy fighter pilot, who, after his Navy career, still provided some consultancy services to the Pentagon, and he was the guy who wrote the script to this particular exercise on October 24th, 26th, 2000. That pilot, his name was Chuck Burlingame, Charles Chuck Burlingame. After he left the Navy, he went to work for American Airlines. So he was the scriptwriter for this exercise on October 24th, 26th, 2000. Charles Chuck Burlingame was also supposedly the pilot of American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon, allegedly, on the morning of 9/11. What a remarkable coincidence. Chuck Burlingame's daughter never believed the official version of events, and she died in rather mysterious circumstances in 2006 in an apartment fire. What a remarkable coincidence. Other cards that are remarkable. This is the card for the oil spill, and this is one of the photographs that I was sent after the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster last year. Of course, we also see this in films. The BP Deepwater Horizon disaster was also one of the events covered in The Knowing with Nicolas Cage, which was released about a year before the event. And then we have the flesh-eating bacteria, which last year in September I thought was the Vibrio vulnificus, which is a naturally occurring bacteria, but having liaised with Michael Edward now for certainly the last 9 months or so, I think this is much more likely to refer to BP's genetically modified microbiology, which causes incredible problems if it attacks the skin. So let's look at what Mitchell Coombs was looking at for March the 11th of this year. Here's the first card, the early warning. Now, the early warning systems were all apparently out of action. All of the tsunami warning systems in the Pacific were supposedly out of action on the morning. Just like all the cameras, go out of action on the most inconvenient. All the cameras in the Pont de l'Arma tunnel apparently weren't working on the evening of August 31st, 1997. Of course, the Pentagon cameras, the 65 cameras that cover the area where whatever hit the Pentagon on 9/11 should have been captured on film, but only 5 frames have been released, and those are pretty inconclusive. And of course, all of the closed-circuit TV in the tube and on the bus that supposedly exploded in Tavistock Square, all those cameras were out of action on that morning. So the early warning card. Then we have the earthquake projector, i.e. something like HAARP. And we have the tidal wave. This, the nuclear accident. And then the combined disasters card. It was the combined disasters card that supposedly Mitchell Coombs focused on to pinpoint the exact moment and location of the tsunami on March the 11th. What was his clue? The clue is in here. There we go. This is the card, the combined disasters card. Look at this clock. Look at the time on the clock. Actually, it looks like the clock is set at 11:11. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, the exact moment of the winter solstice on December 21st, 2012 is at 11:11 GMT. So look, the clock looks as though it's set at 11:11. Well, Mitchell Coombs read that as 11:03. 11:03. And that was where supposedly he was picking up the date and the time for what was about to hit. How did he get the location? Here's the clock. Here's the clock tower. That clock tower is unmistakably the Waco clock tower in Tokyo. And that was how Mitchell Coombs claimed to have identified. There's a little more to this I'm going to share with you a little later. But that's how Mitchell Coombs initially claimed to have identified the location and the time that it would actually hit. Now, there's some other very interesting information that has emerged in the events of March the 3rd this year regarding the tsunami, the earthquake, and the nuclear meltdown. And this is the work of a researcher by the name of Jim Stone. And what Jim has come to the conclusion of is that, first of all, there is very, very little, in fact no, evidence whatsoever that a 9.0 earthquake got anywhere near Japan. There's no doubt about the tsunami, but there's no evidence of an earthquake. And in fact, if you look at all the footage that's available on the web, there's no question that the tsunami hit, but there's no sign of any earthquake damage. There's certainly signs of the earth becoming liquid after the event, but no earthquake damage. The damage was caused by the tsunami. Jim Stone has also ascertained that the meltdown in Fukushima was actually triggered before the tsunami hit it. Something got a little bit out of sync here. So what could have triggered this meltdown? By the way, Fukushima was due to be decommissioned just 10 days later. So this was obviously a very narrow window if they were going to launch this event. What Jim Stone has identified is that the Israeli security company that had the contract for security at Fukushima had installed cameras inside the reactor. Now, here's a remarkable common denominator. Israeli security companies. Because it was an Israeli security company that had the contract in the World Trade Center. It was an Israeli security company that had the contract at all the airports where the planes left on the morning of 9/11. It was an Israeli security company that had the security contract on the London Underground and on the London buses. And here we go again. It was an Israeli security company. Now, I'll tell you what, any organization that still employs an Israeli security company needs to answer some very serious questions. You know, another little fact that very few people are aware of is that Bob Kiley, who was the chief executive of Transport for London, was the highest paid servant on the planet, earning a salary of $1 million, £725,000 a year, and he was an alcoholic. He was an alcoholic. Now, what in God's name was an alcoholic? I mean, I'm not demeaning an alcoholic is somebody with an alcoholic problem, but you know, at the end of the day, they need support and treatment. They don't need to be appointed to the highest paid civil servant position on the planet. Or was there another reason? We'll never know. But the Israeli security company had installed cameras inside the reactor here. And Jim Stone's hypothesis is that the cameras, like this, could have been converted to limited nuclear devices. This is the signature, or this is actually the explosion. This is the recorded by a perimeter camera. This is the actual explosion of the reactor number 4. And this is the explosion of a limited nuclear device under test. Remarkable, isn't it? You know, maybe, just maybe, stretch your imagination a bit. You know, one of the things that we know for sure is that the explanation as to how the Twin Towers disintegrated on 9/11 defies explanation if we limit ourselves to known technology. Building 7 was a classic controlled demolition. The pile of rubble was exactly 12.5% of the original height of the building in its own footprint. A classic, very well executed, controlled demolition. Twin Towers 1 and 2 should have left a pile of rubble some 12, 13 floors high. But they disintegrated into dust, into absolute dust. Now, let's not forget that normally when a building is brought down through controlled demolition, it is a shell. It is stripped of everything. It is stripped of all furniture, of course. It's stripped of all conduit, electrical conduit. It's stripped of all plumbing. It's just a shell. In theory, the Twin Towers were working cities. Some of the floors we know were empty, but many of the floors were fully occupied office buildings, housing as many as 25,000 people per tower. But they disintegrated into dust. There's no explanation. You actually have to suspend your knowledge of Newtonian physics to believe the official version of events on 9/11. Yeah. We won't go there tonight. So here's this is the actual explosion recorded by one of the perimeter cameras at Fukushima. So just imagine, just overlay one of the Twin Towers. And what you see then is the possibility that what happened, and this hypothesis was first put forward a number of years ago by a Finnish physicist, consider the possibility that what actually happened was that there was a limited nuclear device in the basement which effectively destroyed the inside of the buildings, and then the outer walls were then demolished through controlled demolition. But it would actually, I mean, it's a hypothesis, of course. 2 days, just 2 days after the Fukushima disaster, Germany, Angela Merkel in Germany, announced that she is going to shut down with immediate effect all pre-1980 nuclear reactors in Germany. And I thought, hang on a goddamn second, what is she expecting, a tsunami? And then a couple of days after this, she announced that Germany would actually start a program of decommissioning its entire nuclear reactor program to be completed by the year 2020. So, I thought, what the hell is going on here? So this is when I really started to dig. Now I'd got Mitchell Coombs predicting the event, supposedly based on the Illuminati cards, and we got Angela Merkel announcing that she's going to shut down Germany's pre-1980 nuclear reactors. So I'm looking for some common denominators. Here we go. Angela Merkel phase out the nuclear program in Germany. Well, in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, this guy, Andreas von Bülow, who was Minister of Defense, Minister of Intelligence in Germany, immediately grounded the entire Lufthansa fleet of Boeing aircraft. Why did he do that? Well, I think that there's a very good possibility that there are elements within the German security services who are extremely astute geopolitical watchers. They knew about the project for a New American Century document. They knew that Dov Zakheim was one of the signatories to that document. Dov Zakheim was Donald Rumsfeld's comptroller. He was responsible for the Pentagon finances under Donald Rumsfeld's leadership as Secretary of State for Defense. Dov Zakheim was the guy who announced to the media the day before 9/11 that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion. Now, back then, that was a lot of money. How could they have ever known? And anybody who's worked in PR knows that you don't put out news that you don't want to get into the media on a Monday. You put it out on a Friday, when it gets buried over the weekend. But here, Dov Zakheim was announcing that $2.3 trillion couldn't be accounted for on a Monday morning. There was something else about Dov Zakheim, and he had a very close relationship with a company called Systems Planning Corps, which had developed the technology to take over aircraft by remote control. So my hypothesis is that Andreas von Bülow suspected that the aircraft used in the events of 9/11 had been hijacked by remote control. Again, this is a remarkable coincidence because that is exactly the plot of a program that was broadcast in March of 2001 called The Lone Gunman, which was a pilot program for a spin-off of The X-Files. And in that plot, an aircraft, a passenger aircraft, was hijacked remotely and flown towards the Twin Towers. Now, in the plot, the pilots managed to regain control at the last minute and managed to pull the plane up, and you can see them in the program. They just clipped the mast at the top of the Twin Towers, but big sigh of relief, And you can still find that on YouTube. It's called The Lone Gunman, March 2001. Well, consider the possibility that Andreas van Bülow decided that this was high risk and that all of the Lufthansa Boeing aircraft might be susceptible to remote hijacking. So von Bülow immediately demanded that all of the Boeing installed computers, hardware and software, be removed from the German Lufthansa Boeing fleet. So that's the indication that there's some astute geopolitical watchers within the German government. So what were they watching here? What was their concern about what had happened in Japan, and why was Angela Merkel immediately shutting down Germany's pre-1980 nuclear reactors, and in doing so, telling the world, for those who knew the connections, telling the world what was going on? So here's Germany's nuclear reactors, right? This is the North Sea, this is the Baltic. So not too much of a risk from a tsunami, is there? So she wasn't shutting down Germany's nuclear reactor program because of the threat of a tsunami. Then I discovered this. This was a press release issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan on March the 11th, 2010, exactly 1 year before the tsunami. This is a statement by the Press Secretary, Director General for Press and Public Relations, on the decision of the government of Israel regarding the construction of housing units at settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This was effectively the Japanese government stating its support for a Palestinian homeland and a demand that Israel stop its aggressive program of building developments in the West Bank. This was the first time that Japan had voted against Israel or made a public statement against Israeli government policy. We are March the 11th, 2010, exactly 1 year before. This is strike one. Strike two, on February the 18th of this year, the United States vetoed a draft UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements on Palestinian territory after the Palestinians refused to withdraw the Arab-drafted text. Well, the US used their power of veto, but both Japan and Germany voted against the Israeli government and voted on behalf of the Palestinian Authority and voted for the UN resolution demanding a cessation of the construction of West Bank settlements. This was the first time since the Second World War that Germany had voted against Israel. But Japan voting against Israel here, strike 2 for Japan. Strike 3 was a week after this. Japan had offered to enrich uranium for Iran for their civilian nuclear program. This was strike 3. Strike 3 all in the space of the 12 months. And Germany had latched onto this, having shut down their nuclear program, thereby taking the nuclear facilities off of the attack radar. Whoever it was that wanted to get at Germany then went after these cucumbers. Organic cucumbers. Organic, yes, very dangerous organic cucumbers, completely destroying the Spanish cucumber industry, organic cucumber industry, in the proverbial heartbeat, costing the Spanish farming community many millions of euros. Of course, it was very quickly established that it had nothing at all to do with cucumbers. It was actually bean sprouts. Again, organic bean sprouts. Organic bean sprouts. So here we have the E. coli now, the E. coli virus, which has laid, 11 people. Started with cucumbers, now it's in bean sprouts. But then the Koch Institute the Koch Research Institute in Germany established that the E. coli virus had been developed in a laboratory, because this particular brand of E. coli virus was completely immune to all known strains of penicillin. This does not occur naturally. This was developed in a laboratory. And once this got out, it's remarkable how quick the E. coli virus from the news, because this should have been blasted all over the media in the West, because it's impossible for this strain of penicillin-resistant E. coli to have developed in such a short space of time in the natural environment. It was very carefully nurtured to be resistant to all the strains. And of course, there should have been a massive investigation as to who could have developed this strain. Well, it definitely wasn't Al-Qaeda. So who has the capacity to develop something like this? The UK? Yes, absolutely. But would the UK have put it in Germany? Absolutely not. France? Quite probably. The US? Most definitely. And of course, Israel, without any shadow of doubt. So who was it? Well, of course, this gets removed from the media so that there's no real debate. But what was going on here? What was going on? Angela Merkel, through her announcement that she was shutting down Germany's nuclear program, was letting it be known that they knew exactly what had targeted Fukushima, and it was the Stuxnet virus. The Stuxnet virus, which had been developed by the CIA/Mossad, specifically to target Iran's nuclear program. And Iran's nuclear capability was based around pre-1980 Siemens controllers. Exactly the same, of course, as were in the German pre-1980 nuclear reactors here. So Germany was letting it be known that it knew that it was the Stuxnet virus, and whoever has access to the Stuxnet virus, that had deliberately created the meltdown of Fukushima. Having taken the nuclear reactors offline in Germany, somebody had to come on with something else, and they came in with the E. coli. And the reason they targeted organic, because Germany has been one of the prime players in preventing GM crops coming into Europe. Germany actually has 5.4% of its farming land, of its agricultural land, classified as 100% organic, no contamination whatsoever. In the US, none of the land contamination. The GM agenda is being driven by Monsanto. Monsanto is a Zionist entity. You know, I'm going to talk more, and be very clear what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Zionist agenda. So this was effectively a false flag event aimed not so much at the people, but aimed at the governments, to get the governments on track and make sure that the governments in future know which way they're supposed to vote in any kind of UN vote here. Here's the card from the Illuminati cards, the Franken Foods card. And of course the Codex Alimentarius agenda is extremely well advanced because, as many of you will be aware, since May the 1st of this year, all natural health remedy products are effectively illegal in Europe. I made a presentation called Codex Alimentarius, the UN agenda to abolish natural health and to eradicate organic farming, and I made that DVD in 2007. And of course, once again, I was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist by the alternative health community. And then when the law came into play on May the 1st this year, and the law is known as THUMPT, the Traditional Herbal Medicines Products Directive. And, you know, I've been working with Scott Tipps of the National Health Federation for the best part of 4 years to try and raise awareness of what was coming. But, you know, the most arrogant, ignorant people, with all due respect, were natural health practitioners. Because the natural health practitioning community, with a single exception, which is a group of homeopaths, it's the National Homeopathic Register, it's the only group in the UK that made any attempt to try and thwart this agenda. Ireland was different, because Ireland, under the leadership of Cathy Sinnott, who was then an MEP, with the Irish Association of Health Food Stores, put in tremendous efforts at the EU to try and block this agenda. But they really didn't know what they were messing with, because this is a globalist agenda. In Europe, they're focusing on natural health, and you can still buy things that, you know, like St. John's wort, for example, a natural product, but you need to look at the label, because what it says on the labels today, it says St. John's wort. And I've had people say, Ian, come and look at this, come and look at this, look, St. John's wort. You know, what you've been saying is wrong. You can still get this stuff. And I said, take another look at the label, please. Because when you look at the label, what it says is St. John's wort. And then in microscopic print underneath it says equivalent. Equivalent. The reason for banning natural health products is so that the pharmaceutical industry can control all medicines. Natural health is about prevention. The pharmaceutical industry has a very simple business model, and that is that every human life form, from the moment of conception to the moment of death, is a potential revenue stream. And the sooner that you're on that revenue stream, the better they like it. So the World Health Organization should, of course, properly be named the World Sickness Organization, because there ain't no money in health, but there's a shed load of money in sickness. And by abolishing natural health products, they can accelerate the process of sickness. Meanwhile, in the US, they're focusing on organic farming. In the US, a farmer or a retailer can label something as organic if it has 10% contamination. 10% contamination. In Europe at the moment, it's still 0.17%, but that's going to change. But 10%, you buy organic milk in the US, and it has a shelf life of a month. Because it's organic apart from the formaldehyde. You can see where this is going. I mean, this is all about, effectively, part of the population reduction agenda. By the way, here's a classic example of controlling the food. In Iraq, the fledgling Iraqi government had foisted upon them their new constitution by Paul Bremner, who was the first ambassador to Iraq. It was a young government. Obviously, it was a puppet government appointed by the US administration. It was effectively 100 military orders, but they changed it to articles. Anyway, Article 81 specifically prohibits Iraqi farmers from saving their seeds. So here we have the cradle of civilization, where, you know, the literature tells us that that's where humanity was taught animal and farming husbandry. And we have a situation where the Iraqi farmers are banned from saving their seeds, they have to buy their seeds from a company known as... Oh, you guys are good. Monsanto. Monsanto. And people say, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. How can they enforce it? Well, they enforce it because Monsanto has a contract with a company called Shea. Now, you've never heard of Shea. It doesn't mean anything to you. And there's no point in looking it up until I explain a bit more, because Shea is actually spelled XE. But if you go Google XE, what you're going to find is a currency exchange website. XE, Shea, previously known as Blackwater. Blackwater was renamed because it had a bit of bad press, because there was some collateral damage from some of their mercenaries getting a bit trigger happy. So they decided that they needed a makeover, and the PR company came up with the name of Shea, spelled XE, so that you've actually got to Google Shea and Blackwater to get anywhere close to what's going on here. And of course the whole idea is that the casual researcher, the casual surfer, is never going to make the link. Monsanto has a contract with Shea to effectively enforce the fact that Iraqi farmers buy their seeds with the Terminator gene in from Monsanto. And unlike you know, most suppliers, if you get a duff product, you either get a refund or you get a replacement. Not with Monsanto. It's, you know, tough shit. You've got to shell out again. And this has been going on for 15 years in India with the BT cotton. Monsanto managed to persuade the cotton farmers in India in 1994 that their BT cotton seeds were the panacea. You know, they would have an increased crop, get more money. Well, the opposite was true. The crops have failed year on year on year. And the Indian farmers have had to borrow more and more money because, you know, they're not making any money on the failed crops to be able to buy the following year's crops, which fail again. And so the loop continues. And Monsanto just keep getting them into more and more debt. Well, many of these Indian farmers are committing suicide, which may seem a bit extreme until you start to understand the law in this particular part of India, which is that debt incurred by the father is inherited by the family when the father dies, except in the event of the father committing suicide, in which case the debt dies with him. Well, I was giving this version of this presentation in London some time ago, and I made the observation that since 1994, tens of thousands of Indian farmers have committed suicide. And a lady stood up at the back and she said, Ian, I have to correct you. That is not correct. You must get your facts right. It is not tens of thousands of Indian farmers, it is hundreds of thousands. And the lady who stood up at the back was a lady called Vandana Shiva, who's been a campaigner on this issue for many, many years. And earlier this year, a New York university issued a report on this BT cotton disaster in India, and in that report it states that one Indian cotton farmer commits suicide every 30 minutes. Do Monsanto give a damn? Of course not. So don't think for 1 minute that you can avoid this kind of thing occurring. Why do you think local authorities are starting to sell off allotments when allotments are in demand more than at any time since immediately after the Second World War? The reason being is that because of the local authorities' relationship with a charity known as Common Purpose, the local authorities know that in the not too distant future it is going to be illegal for people to grow and consume their own food. All on the grounds of food safety. How can your government protect you if you will insist on growing your own food and eating it? It sounds crazy, but it's already on the statute books in the US. Let's come right up to speed here. Norway's 9/11. This is the papers from last Saturday. I was actually giving a version of this presentation for the very first time last Saturday at the Glastonbury Symposium. And I obviously learned about what was going on in Norway at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. Look, it took me until 9 o'clock in the evening on Friday to establish beyond any shadow of doubt that this was nothing at all to do with Al-Qaeda. Yet, all of the British media on Saturday immediately labels it Al Qaeda massacre. I mean, even though by the time the paper was put into print, it had to have been evident to even the most lazy reporter that this had nothing at all to do with Al Qaeda. But of course, you know, this gets the fear going again. You know, it's Al Qaeda, oh my God, and it's close to home. Well, like I said, it didn't take too long to find out what was going on here. You know, here we have the effects of the fertilizer bomb, like I said, very, very similar in many respects to what occurred at the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City. The difference being here is that this clearly was an external bomb. And when you look at the devastation of the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City, there is no way that that is the result of an external bomb. That was a bomb in the building that blew the whole of the front of the building off. In fact, there was more than one bomb there. And of course, all those people who witnessed the fact that there was more than one bomb there have met with mysterious deaths over the last 16 years.
Why do you say that's an internal bomb, an external bomb?
Well, it could have been internal, but basically this is the classic signature of an external bomb. I mean, you know, if we look at the photographs of a lot of the devastation caused by bombs that were attributed to the IRA in the UK and in Ireland, you know, this is the signature of something external. It could have been exacerbated with something internal, but if you look at the Alfred P. Murrah building, you'll see the whole of the front of the building had actually been sucked off and supposedly thrown over the top of the Ryder truck. But then, of course, we have the other part of it, and now, even though on the front page it says it's Al Qaeda, here we've got the rampage of the blue-eyed assassin. Well, blue-eyed and blonde. Now, I lived in the Middle East for a number of years, and I've got to tell you, I didn't come across many blue-eyed blondes of Arabic origin. But I had something in the back of my mind. I seem to remember, you know, some years ago, there was a number of attempts to start what's called mindscaping, sowing the seeds of non-traditional terrorists, the white Al-Qaeda Muslim sympathizer. So I Googled. Hang on, let's go here. I Googled. And I'm amazed at what I come up with. And I'll show you that in just a second. But I'm just going to give you why I think Norway was the target here. Norway has endorsed the Palestinian statehood, exactly the same as Japan and Germany. Norway is withdrawing from Libya. It's withdrawing all of its troops from Libya on August the 1st. So, you know, that in itself should have been, you know, the first warning bell that this had nothing at all to do with Al-Qaeda. But then I discovered that Norway's withdrawn investment funding from all Israeli firms involved in developing West Bank settlements. And then, of course, subsequently I discovered that on the island where the massacre occurred, the day before, they had held a pro-Palestinian rally. So, yeah, we've got the same signature here. It's strike one, strike two, strike three, just as we saw with Japan and with Germany. Now, it may not be directly attributable here to Mossad. It may not be. But, you know, it's got their hallmarks sort of all over it. Or somebody who wants to make it look like Mossad. Here we go. Here's my Google for the new Al-Qaeda blonde-haired, blue-eyed Westerners. And this is from 2008. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. But let me just show you a very short clip from a US discussion on the new Al-Qaeda blonde, blue-eyed Westerners.
Also, we're going to talk more about the controversial subject regarding Al-Qaeda. Are they recruiting a white army now in Great Britain? Some people say it's 1,400 people strong, and why is that important? Because this is what we've always talked about, that if you have people in one country transplanting to another religion and they maybe aren't exactly what you think they are, that can be more difficult to fight.
Yeah, they're converting them in prison to extremist
kill us.
Muslims. Yeah, okay, great.
It's mindscaping. It's sowing the seeds, planting the seeds. Because, you know, clearly, in the false flag arena, they were running out of Muslim patsies, because people within the Muslim community were starting to realize that maybe getting involved with these exercises wasn't the smartest move. So now they're having to turn to the blonde, blue-eyed Al-Qaeda sympathizer and blame it on Al-Qaeda. Another remarkable news release from September the 10th, 2001, is this. Mossad are ruthless and cunning, having the capability to target US forces and make it look like a Palestinian Arab act. And this appeared in the Washington Times on the day before 9/11, and it was an extract from a report issued by the US Army School of Advanced Military Studies. What a coincidence. Now, let's explain what we're talking about here, because Israel has a massive problem. Israel has a massive emigration problem right now. It's losing anything between 100,000 and 250,000 people a year, depending on the reports you take, because the Israeli government is trying to suppress the number of people leaving Israel. Why are they leaving? Well, first of all, Israel is an extremely apartheid society, depending on your Jewish ethnic origins. But more importantly, many people are leaving Israel because many Jewish people are deeply disturbed by the Zionist agenda. The Zionist agenda of Palestinian and global hegemony. Now, there's one book that's a very important book that was published a few years ago. It's written by a professor of Middle Eastern history at Exeter University. The author is a guy called Ilan Pappé, and the book is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. That book could only have ever been written by a Jewish historian. The Zionist agenda is the most anti-Semitic agenda on the planet. The Zionists, who are effectively global corporatists, the Zionists are the ones trying to establish a global corporation. And they are hiding behind the Jewish people and using the Jewish people effectively as a shield whilst they pursue their extremely aggressive and pernicious agenda, which is a game of global monopoly, the ownership of everything on the planet. That's part of the global financial meltdown agenda. But how do they get away with this? Well, take a look at this remarkable interview with Shulamit Aloni, who's a former Israeli minister.
Yours is a voice of criticism we don't often hear in the United States. Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and the ties between Israel and the American Jewish establishment are very strong, and they are strong in this country. As you know, they have power, which it's okay. They are talented people, and they have power, money, and media, and other things. And their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong, the identification. And they are not ready to hear criticism. And it's very easy to blame people who criticize certain acts of the Israeli government as anti-Semitics, and to bring up the Holocaust and the suffering of the Jewish people, and that justify everything we do to the Palestinians.
Yeah, pretty much spelled out straight from the horse's mouth. That's how they control and shut down any criticism. You know, and I'm often asked, in fact I was asked earlier, you know, my views on Alex Jones. You know, I gave a talk at a geopolitics conference in Santa Cruz in May of last year, and although I got a standing ovation from the audience, when I got out the back, the organizers were in apoplexy, asking me whatever made me think that I could discuss the issues that I'd raised, because I was discussing Zionism, I was discussing dual passport holders, I was discussing the elephant in the White House Oval Office. If you look at the number repeat, the 27 people who signed the PNAC document, Rebuilding America's Defences, 15 of them are dual passport holders, dual loyalties. Every other speaker in that conference was talking about the symptoms. I was trying to get to the root cause. Nearly 2 years ago, the British Jewish community took out full-page advertisements in all of the quality British papers stating that they would no longer tolerate being abused by the Zionists when they criticised the Zionist aggression against the Palestinian people and elsewhere on the planet. So let's be very clear, what it is that we're talking about here. Why are we in Tripoli? Or we're not in Tripoli. Why are we in Libya? We shouldn't be, of course. But it's brilliant. It's brilliant. When the regime change in Iraq was being planned in 2003, millions of people expressed their opinion by hitting the streets all around the world. How many people hit the streets to protest against NATO's aggression in Libya? None. None. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that Gaddafi is necessarily a model leader, but hang on a second, let's take a look at Bush and Obama, Cameron and Blair. They have far more blood on their hands. And like I said earlier, the UN were about to issue a report on January the 4th of this year from their own research teams, which was praising Gaddafi as a model humanitarian leader in the Arab-African world. Germany, of course, did not participate in this. Germany refused to participate in this Libyan expedition. And of course, it's increasingly looking as though NATO is going to get their butt kicked. And that's exactly the way it should be. This is an aggressive, illegal war. And the objectives are exactly the same as they were in Iraq 8 years ago. In the US, Barack Obama was getting a lot of grief from various quarters about the US's involvement in Libya. So the opportunity was taken to take it off the front pages because Barack Obama thought that he could settle the birth certificate issue once and for all. He was getting a bit of grief on this issue from Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was a bit like a pit bull terrier on the birth certificate issue. He wasn't going to. So Barack Obama, or obviously his advisors, decided it was time to put the issue to bed. The only problem was that the moment that it was posted on the web, it became immediately apparent to anybody who has a cursory knowledge of Photoshop that it was made up in 9 layers. So although this isn't a big issue outside the US, it is a big issue in the US because obviously it determines the validity of Obama's authenticity to be a candidate for president. So this issue was clearly an embarrassment. So they needed something to sweep this off of the front pages in the US media, and so they had to quickly come up with something pretty dramatic to take the birth certificate issue off the front pages, so they came up with this, which of course they had to assassinate Osama bin Laden for what is at least the 3rd time. The vast majority of people, certainly in the Bush administration, believe that Osama bin Laden was dead before the end of 2001. Of course, Benazir Bhutto claimed in an interview with David Frost in 2007 that Osama bin Laden had been murdered by Omar Sheikh. Now, this should have been groundbreaking news, but David Frost just let it go straight over his head. Obviously, in his ear was going, don't go there, don't go there, leave it, leave it. And of course, just a few weeks after that interview, Benazir Bhutto herself was assassinated. Was that because she let slip this piece of information? Well, soon this began to unravel very quickly. They needed to get this off the front pages, but of course what caused so much concern was the fact that Osama bin Laden has supposedly been captured and then assassinated and then dumped at sea. Well, at great risk to my sources, I have got the footage of what actually occurred when Osama bin Laden was being flown out of Pakistan.
Roger that. Target Geronimo is acquired. Over. Copy that. Yes, current location is 469. Holy shit! Stand by. Oh my god. Oh my god. Back up.
God. So look, you can see it was just a tragic accident. They didn't really mean to bury him at sea. And at least that should put all conspiracy theories to bed once and for all, right? So they needed something to get this off the front pages because this wasn't going away either. And the following day, the Monday was the day that America burst through its debt ceiling. So the headlines on Monday should have been America bankrupt, IMF called in, just like occurred in Ireland, Spain, Portugal and Italy. But instead, we got this. Strauss-Kahn, of course, easiest person in the world to set up because he was well known as an aggressive sexual predator. And you know, his behavior in New York, I think we can pretty safely assume, was probably a repeat of many other hotels that he'd stayed in and got away with it. This time, of course, he didn't. And you know, rightly, of course, he was charged, and he was sentenced to be on bail. And the bail conditions were really quite stringent. He was required to wear, you know, one of the electronic bracelets. He was required to live in an apartment that had 24-hour security. He actually had to employ security guards, all as part of his bail conditions. But the judge setting the bail conditions obviously had a sense of humor, because one of the other bail conditions was that he actually had to live with his wife. I think that's the point at which I'd have said, no, excuse me, I think I'll go back to jail. But in France, I got to tell you, when I worked with Schlumberger and I was based in France in 1990, my boss, in my performance appraisal, actually suggested that I needed to get a mistress. the 5 Cassette. It's the name of a dry cleaners in France, but it's also what the French do between 5 and 7 in the evening. I asked him whether he had anybody in mind. My wife. Right. This is what should have been not on the front page. What should have been on the front pages is America bursting through the debt ceiling. We're about August the 2nd is the next point at which America is going to reach its current debt ceiling, and of course that will probably be raised again. But now let's take a look at some practical things that we can do to avoid getting caught up in what is coming. Now, what is about to happen, possibly in a matter of weeks, I think they're actually going to extend this out until September of next year. But, you know, there are other views that suggest that it may happen sooner. But those people who have got money in the bank, that is probably not the smartest place to have it right now. In fact, in the US, Citibank sent out letters to all its customers in August of last year, advising them that the bank reserved the right to shut its doors at no notice, up to a period of 14 days, to be extended in the event of a national emergency. But if having money in the bank in the US is high risk, but in Europe as well, because, you know, what we're seeing right now, obviously, the smart move should have been for Ireland, Portugal, probably Spain, and certainly Italy to get out of the euro a long time ago. They should have done what Iceland did, told the banks to take a hike. You know, you're not reading very much about what's going on in Iceland, are you? No, because the bankers, the World Bank, the IMF, don't want people to know that what the Icelanders did in telling the banks to take a hike set them on the path to recovery, and they're well on the road to recovery now. It meant taking responsibility for their economy. The Icelandic economy went into total meltdown. How many people have been forced out of their homes in Iceland in the last 2.5 years because of that total collapse of their economy? None, exactly, none. Because the Icelandic government basically said, we are going to remove all fear. The banks created this problem, it's the banks that have to take the hit, and we are not going to put our citizens in a state of fear that they're going to lose their home. So they've created a program that actually translates as debt forgiveness. It's not really debt forgiveness, but what they're doing is they're actually balancing the mortgage with the adjusted value of the property. So if somebody borrowed 800,000 kroner to buy a property of 1 million kroner, but that property now has a nominal value of, let's say, 500,000 kroner, then their mortgage liability is reduced to 80% of the adjusted value. And if they can't pay it, then it's just deferred. And that's it. The banks have to take the hit. But no, say, you know, last year 38,000 people lost their homes. This year the forecast is 53,000 people. Every country needs to do what Iceland has done. What is going on here in Libya, a big part of the campaign in Libya was to shut down Gaddafi's Bank of Libya, the Bank of the Libyan people. All of the countries that are regarded by the media as the axis of evil, Venezuela, Cuba, Libya, formerly Iraq, Syria, Iran, North Korea, they all have one thing in common. They're all free of debt from the World Bank. There's your clue. And eventually, of course, this is exactly what has to happen here within Europe. But, you know, what we've got is we've got puppet politicians who have basically been told that they'll be taken care of. All they've got to do is basically sell the soul of the country, which is, of course, exactly what happened in Ireland. We're going to see a phenomenal rise in food prices. They're already rising. So if you have liquidity, if you have available cash, I would suggest that one of the first things you want to do, if you haven't done already, is build up a stock of at least 90 days worth of food and water. Because when the shift really does hit the fan, it may come without any warning whatsoever. Now, I hope to God that I'm wrong, and I hope to God that we don't go into absolute total meltdown. But even if we don't, even if we somehow manage to limp along, food prices are going to increase. They're already increasing by a phenomenal rate. You see here, I hope. Yes. Yeah. 37% on these produce.
Investing in food futures.
Well, you gamble on food futures. I would say having food is a lot more edible than having food futures. Food and water are the critical factors. Food, water and shelter. If you know that your food, water and shelter is secure, then at least you take away that aspect of fear. And if the food, if I'm wrong, and hopefully I am, then even by stocking up on the food, you can alleviate the increase in prices by drawing on your stock. In the longer term, of course, think about growing your own. Like I said, I'm not sure how much longer we're going to have that luxury, but if more people start growing their own, if more and more people take responsibility for at least a percentage of their own food supply, then it becomes more and more difficult to shut it down. So we've got to start taking some responsibility here. But if after taking care of your shelter, your food and your water, you've still got liquidity, what are you going to do with it? Well, you've got to do with it what the financiers do with it. Here is the 10-year gold chart. 10 years ago, gold was at $275 an ounce. On Friday, it closed at $1,628 an ounce. Over 10 years, that's a yield of 492%. 492%. It's about 30% plus on compound. Here, to buy the average property in the UK, you needed 353 ounces of gold. As of yesterday, you needed 148 ounces of gold to buy the average property in this country. The property in this country has devalued by 60% in real terms over the last decade. There never was a property boom. It was a mirage. There never was a Celtic tiger in Ireland. It was a mirage, deliberately contrived to get people into debt. Let's have a look at the gold over 1 year. 36.8% yield over 1 year. Over 60 days, 5.7%. Now, this is an interesting chart because, first of all, you don't go buying gold from a high street dealer. You only buy gold from an established trader. And the masses are never taught about gold dealing because you're not supposed to own gold. Your money is supposed to be in the banks where it can be abused. And you be thrown the scraps of a few percentage points of interest while these guys pay themselves outrageous bonuses. The reason they're getting outrageous bonuses is for the same reason anybody gets a bonus. And that is they achieved their goals and objectives. They've done exactly what they were asked to do, which is destroy the economy. Get people into debt. But you don't buy gold for a short burst. You buy gold for the long-term hedge. It protects your wealth. It protects the purchasing power of your wealth. You know, it's back in the 1940s, it was said that one gold coin, a sovereign, would buy a reasonable quality suit. Today, one gold coin, a sovereign, which is about £240, will buy you a reasonable quality suit. Gold protects the purchasing power. But on a day-to-day basis, you know, you don't look at gold every hour, because otherwise, you know, 1 minute you're in ecstasy and the next minute you're having a coronary. The important thing is to look at the underlying trend. The Bible for gold is kitco.com, Kitco. Don't take anything I say at face value. I'm not a financial advisor. You go look at, do the research for yourself. But Kitco, take a look at Kitco and look at you know, the precious metals market there. But this is what the people who know what's going on are doing and have been doing for some time. Anybody who, you know, seen my meltdown presentations or came to any presentation I've given really in the last 5 years, you know, will know that those people who followed my counsel 5 years ago are smiling from ear to ear. But let me just show you a short clip from a recent discussion between Ron Paul and Ben Bernanke, because this is very enlightening.
Very quickly, if you could answer another question, because I'm curious about this. You know, the price of gold today is $1,580. The dollar during these last 3 years was devalued almost 50%. When you wake up in the morning, do you care about the price of gold?
Well, I pay attention to the price of gold, but I think it reflects a lot of things. It reflects global uncertainties. I think the reason people hold gold is as a protection against what we call tail risk, really, really bad outcomes. And to the extent that the last few years have made people more worried about potential of a major crisis, then they have gold as a protection.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
It's not money. Even if it has been money for 6,000 years, somebody reversed that and eliminated that economic law.
Well, it's you know, it's an asset. I mean, it's the same. Would you say Treasury bills are money? I don't think they're money either, but they're a financial asset.
Why do central banks hold it?
Well, it's a form of reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition.
Some people still think it's money. I yield back. My time is up. Thank you.
Now, there's a technical term to describe what Ben Bernanke was saying there, and it's bollocks. I mean, this is just, I mean, it's a classic example of lies, deceit, and obfuscation. You know, let's say anything other than admit the truth, because we don't want the people to know they can buy gold. In fact, the US is the only country on the planet that has actually confiscated its citizens' gold, which it did in 1934, under the direction of an incredible guy who I haven't got time to talk about today, but a guy called Bernard Baruch, who effectively drafted a presidential order in March of 1934, presented it to Franklin D. Roosevelt on, I think it was March the 9th, and the following day it became law, demanding that all American citizens take their gold to the nearest bank and sell it to the bank at $27.50 an ounce, under threat of, I think it was $10,000 in fines or life imprisonment. I mean, many people did hand it over, many didn't. But that's why in the US right now, many people are taking their cash out of the banks, going across to Mexico, buying gold in Mexico, and then smuggling it back across the border because they don't want to leave any paper trail. Now, I could spend some time explaining the magnitude of the financial disaster in Europe, but I came across this sketch from an Australian economics program. Now, this sketch was recorded in October of last year, and when this sketch was produced, every single number mentioned in the sketch was absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And I want you to listen very carefully for the number that is specifically mentioned for Ireland and for Ireland's debt.
Time now for John Clark and Brian Doyle with a few reflections on Europe's financial woes.
Your name is Roger, yes?
Roger.
Ah, that's your name.
Roger.
Good. And what do you do, Roger?
I'm a financial consultant.
Ah, financial consultant, eh?
Roger,
yeah,
yes.
Terrific. And, Roger, how's business at the moment?
Not bad, thank you. Been a bit quiet lately.
How do you mean lately?
Since the war, been a bit quiet.
Fair enough. OK, Roger, your special subject tonight is the economies of the European community. Time starts now. Best of luck.
Thank you.
How much does Greece owe, Roger?
$367 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Mostly to the other European economies.
Correct. How much does Ireland owe?
$865 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Other European economies, mostly.
Correct. How much do Spain and Italy owe?
$1 trillion each.
Correct. Who to?
Mainly France, Britain and Germany.
Correct. And how are Germany, France and Britain going, Roger?
Well, they're struggling a bit, aren't they?
Correct. Why?
Because they've lent all these vast amounts of money to other European economies that can't possibly pay them back.
Correct. So what are they going to do?
They're going to have to bail them out.
Correct. Where are they getting the money to do that, Roger?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
How much does Portugal owe?
Hang on a minute. What was the answer to that earlier question?
Just keep answering the questions, Roger. Where is Portugal going to get the money it owes to Germany if Germany can't get back the money that it lent to Italy?
Just a minute. What was the answer to the previous question? The question was, how can broke economies lend money to other broke economies who haven't got any money because they can't pay back the money the broke economy lent to the other broke economy and shouldn't have lent it to them in the first place because the broke economy can't pay it back?
You're wasting very valuable time, Roger. How much money does Spain owe to Italy?
$41 billion, but where are they going to get it?
Correct. What does Italy owe to Spain?
$27 billion, but they haven't got it. They're broke.
Correct. How can they pay each other if neither of them has any money?
They're going to get a bailout, aren't they?
Correct. And where's the money coming from for the bailout?
That's what I'm asking you.
Correct. Why are people selling the European currency and buying the US dollar?
Because the US economy is so much stronger than the European economy.
Correct. Why is that, Roger?
Because it's owned by China.
Correct. And very well done. And after that round, you've lost $1 million.
I've lost $1 million. I thought you said well done.
Yes, well done. You've only lost $1 million. That's an extraordinary performance, Roger.
I've only lost $1 million.
Very well done.
And that's quite good, is it?
Oh, it's excellent.
Sell everything immediately. Quickly.
Did you catch the number for Ireland?
865.
Yeah, 865. What was the number being bandied around in the media that they needed for the bailout? It's 85. 85 billion. So how can you owe 865 billion, but you only need a bailout of 85 billion? It's called fractional reserve banking. All you need is 1% of the money on your books to be able to start paying off your loans. As it happens, what wasn't widely published was that Ireland has since requested and received an additional 24 billion. So in other words, the bailout to Ireland is now 109 billion, which means that their debt is over $1 trillion. Ireland can never recover from that. Brian Cowen and Brian Lenihan knew that they had sold the soul of the Irish people and the Irish nation when they met in September of 2008 under the jurisdiction of this guy, Peter Sutherland, former Attorney General of Ireland, founding director of the World Trade Organization in 1994, former EU Commissioner, former chairman of BP, current chairman of Goldman Sachs, was on the board of directors of Royal Bank of Scotland until it was taken into British national ownership when he was asked to leave. He's also a Bilderberger. This is the guy who's committed arch treason. And I believe that Brian Cowen and Brian Lenihan, by the way, died a few weeks ago. And I believe that Brian Lenihan died a broken man because I believe that Lenihan realised that he and Cowen had been totally outmanoeuvred and they had effectively sold the soul of the Irish people. But there is an Irishman. He doesn't live in Ireland. He lives on the East Coast in New England, works in the financial community in the US. And this guy absolutely nails it. In 2.5 minutes, he absolutely nails what's gone wrong in Ireland.
I'm Jason Calabrese with the Financial News, and today we're talking to a real Irishman and someone in the money business about what's going on in Ireland with the Celtic Tiger and the banks are hurting so much, the downfall. What's the story here?
Do you really want to know?
I'd love to know.
Well, I'll tell you, it's like what has happened all over the Western world for the last 20 and 30 years. Greed, greed, and more fucking greed, and cheap money. And in Ireland, it's a tragedy what happened to the Tiger. We have, I'd say, 4 causes. We had a stupid fucking government. We had a regulator that was asleep at the wheel. and we had very deceitful and conniving and corrupt developers, and of course, above all, wanking fucking bankers. We had these arseholes that for the last 20, 30 years are getting these massive bonuses, these employees and directors of banks, on the misfortune of the working class, and getting these huge bonuses and salaries. But, you know, if you and all these arseholes should be thrown in jail and the keys thrown away for the rest of their life. And you know, sir, if you went in and you're unemployed and you wanted to take a loaf of bread out of a store or a supermarket to feed your family, guess what? You'll be up in court for it. These assholes are living all over the world now on the backs of the misfortunate working people. And who's going to pay for all this? We've mortgaged the next generation or two. Who's going to pay for it? The working man. We got the labourer, the small farmer, the fisherman, the nurse, the teacher, the policeman, the fireman, the plumber, the carpenter. Fuck's sake, man, this is a joke.
So I'm sensing a wee bit of discontent?
You are indeed, sir. And by the way, let's not be too cocky in this part of the world, North America either. All these debts that people have accumulated over the last 30 years, hey, everybody gets their day in the sunshine.
And you know, speaking of the Celtic Tiger and all that you mentioned, you know that Michael Flatley is really from Chicago. Well, that's another story.
Fuck off!
Don't you hate it when people hold back and won't tell you what they really think? He's spot on. And the key phrase there is, we have mortgaged the next generations. We have mortgaged the next generations. You know, by allowing this existing paradigm to continue, we're not taking responsibility for ourselves, let alone what legacy we're leaving future generations. You know, we absolutely need to follow the lead that Iceland has set. You know, we need to tell the bankers to go take a hike. You know, this is like a casino losing its butt and then calling upon the taxpayer to bail it out. Because that's exactly what occurred here. It's exactly what occurred in Ireland. Because once Cowan and Lenihan, under Sutherland's direction, committed the Irish taxpayer to underwrite all the debt of Irish banks, the bankers just went, yes! And just went crazy. It's a deliberate ploy to subject the future generations to lives of abject economic slavery. You know, those of us that are, 50 plus, we're not in the frame here. It's the young generation. It's the generations coming through. You know, and that's really what we've got to start taking account of here. Are we going to take responsibility for effectively being asleep at the wheel, taking our eyes off the ball, and being manipulated into massive, outrageous debt, which, like the Icelandic government say, is not the fault of the people, it's the fault of the banks for literally creating this false sense of well-being? We've got to start taking responsibility. Another Illuminati card that is quite remarkable, this is from the original set. It's really incredible, isn't it? Well, it looks a bit like Barack Obama, doesn't it? Yeah. Backlash. The backlash. By the way, there's another card in the set, and it's remarkable how it looks like Julian Assange. But that's another presentation. Another card is this one, the charismatic leader. Create the crisis. Get the charismatic leader. Because you know who's setting himself up for that. Why do you think this guy became a Catholic? He became a Catholic because the EU is a Catholic entity. If you want more on that, Peter Sutherland gave a lecture at St John's College, Oxford on May the 15th last year, the same day as Zbigniew Brzezinski gave a presentation to the Council on Foreign Relations, in which he said the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. Peter Sutherland gave a presentation to St John's College in Oxford, in which he spelt out the Catholic links, the importance of the EU as a Catholic entity. The reason they want this guy, and this guy, by the way, is a shoo-in to replace Rompuy. They wanted Rompuy, first of all, to take the role of EU president, to create the impression that it's just a sinecure role, it's just a ceremonial role. But anybody who's read the Treaty of Lisbon will know that the powers bestowed upon the EU president by the Treaty of Lisbon are despotic. And the reason that they want this arch socio-psychopath in the role is because they're gagging for World War III, and Blair will think nothing of initiating it. Absolutely nothing. It's just collateral. So, you know, we absolutely need to start not just waking up, but actually start to get involved here and not just assume that it's all going to work out all right on the night. What does Mitchell Coombs have to say? Well, you know, actually, you're going to have to go and look at Mitchell Coombs's Facebook page for yourself. But Mitchell makes a very interesting observation of what he thinks is going to kick off on September the 11th at 11:11. Actually, I think something may kick off on September the 9th, because this, with the 10th anniversary of 9/11, the powers that be are increasingly aware that people are waking up to the lies and the deceit of the official version of events, and they may actually look to stage something on September the 9th, so that over the weekend of the 10th anniversary, it's completely removed from the front pages. But Mitchell Coombs, he's not just a name on Facebook. He's not just a watcher of the Illuminati cards, because this is a book that Mitchell Coombs published a little while ago, Sensing Spirit. And I discovered that Mitchell Coombs is actually a very well-regarded psychic in Australia. He doesn't make any such claims to that on his Facebook page or in his normal day-to-day conversations. But clearly there's a little bit more to Mitchell than perhaps he presents. Now, the agenda is accelerating at a phenomenal rate of knots, exactly as I and many others predicted. But there's one event coming up that I think is going to be very significant. And it's an event that I first floated the idea of in 2007 in a presentation that I called Fool Me Once. And let me just quote from a document that appeared in the public domain in 1967. This is a document called the Report from Iron Mountain. In this document, it also discusses the use of pollution and global warming to create fear. And then the Club of Rome actually picked up on that in their document of 1990, where they stated that global warming and pollution could be used as fear so that humanity be the enemy of itself. But I want to refer you to this particular comment in the Report from Iron Mountain, because it says it has been hotly argued that a believable external menace would offer the last best hope for peace by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. It is more probable in our judgment that such a threat will have to be invented. Well, actually, I can attribute Bill Cooper, the author of Behold a Pale Horse, which he published in 1990. And Bill Cooper actually identified the earliest reference to mentioning or coming up with the idea of a fake alien invasion being used to unite the planet under a one world government. And that was in 1917 by a guy called John Dewey, who at the time was the US Secretary of State for Education, believe it or not. Well, I see more and more interesting coincidences which point to the London Olympics being used to stage the fake alien invasion. And in fact, from stating that the London Olympics would be used to stage this event, which I first stated in 2007, now I'm going to be even more specific. I think they're going to go for August the 12th. August the 12th, next year. It's the closing ceremony of the London Olympics. And a couple of remarkable coincidences. People here remember the film District 9? The aliens landing in South Africa? Well, in the closing scene, where one of the good aliens is leaving the planet with his son, and he turns to a human that has supported them in their escape, and he says, "We will return. We will come back for you in 3 years. I promise." That film was released on August the 14th, 2009. So 3 years would be August the 14th, 2012, but that's beyond the Olympics. And then the film that was released earlier this year called Battle Los Angeles, in the opening scene, where the aliens arrive over Los Angeles, and the opening scene is set on August the 12th, 2011. There are other coincidences, if you like, that point to August the 12th. But one thing I can assure you is I won't be in London any time during the course of the Olympics. They have the technology. There is no question they have the technology, whether it's flying saucer type technology, anti-technology, Project Bluebeam, which is the hologram technology. I mean, just look at the technology that is used in ordinary films. It doesn't take much to create the mythology to convince the masses that they are being attacked in an alien invasion. And of course, the forerunner to this was Orson Welles on August 31st, 1938, where he was reading a version of War of the Worlds, and he panicked the whole of upstate New York. Here's another poster from London Transport, secure beneath the watchful eyes. And it was in 2007 that I first presented this as the Zion logo. Seb Coe is an arch-Zionist. You remember there was a lot of media debate about this logo, which they paid £400,000 for. And there's a lot of debate. I mean, even The Sun ran a headline saying it causes epilepsy. Well, Seb Coe, in response to all the criticism about the logo, said this logo represents something in which we believe, and we will not be changing it under any circumstances. And it was that speech which actually triggered me to look at what it was that was contained within this logo, and I came up with that. And in that presentation I gave in 2007, the first time I gave this presentation, by the way, was actually in Manchester a few months before, but I actually recorded the presentation. It became the DVD for me once in July of 2007, and there was a young lad in the audience, a young lad called Rick Clay, and it was this presentation that actually set him off on his own journey. Unfortunately, Rick left this mortal coil in untimely fashion about a year later. I talked about this book, Behold a Pale Horse by Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper was a former naval officer, submariner, and after coming off the submarines, he went into naval intelligence. And what he saw over the following 20 years led him to write this book. He stated when he wrote this book that he was challenging authority, and that in writing this book he would become a target for authority. Let me just give you this quote from page 177 in this book. Bill writes, he says, "Can you imagine what would happen? Los Angeles is hit with a 9.0 quake. New York City is destroyed by a terrorist-planted atomic bomb. World War III breaks out in the Middle East. The banks and the stock market collapse. Extraterrestrials land on the White House lawn. Food disappears from the markets. Some people disappear. The Messiah presents himself to the world, all in a very short period of time. Can you imagine? The world power structure can and will, if necessary, make some or all of these things happen to bring about their new world order." That's Bill Cooper writing in 1991. Bill Cooper was assassinated on November the 6th, 2001, by the Arizona police in a contrived event, effectively. Bill Cooper being extremely prescient. This is a superb book. Behold a Pale Horse. Absolutely recommend it. This is from David Rockefeller. In fact, this was at, I think, the inaugural meeting of the World Trade Organization in 1994. He said, "We are on the verge of global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order." You know, these guys are able to perpetrate their agenda because they believe they have three tools, three very, very significant and powerful tools that enable them to perpetrate that agenda, and all of those tools are in our hands. So what are these tools? The first tool is apathy. The apathy of the people. Keep the people locked into consumerist materialism, which is exactly what Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote in his book Between Two Ages, The Technotronic Era, which he published in 1970. And in that book he said, the challenge for Western governments will be to keep their people locked into consumerist materialism, preventing them from realizing who they truly are. That's Zbigniew Brzezinski, the same guy who, before the Council on Foreign Relations last year, stated that the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. The second tool, and this is the tool that actually they believe is most powerful, and that's abdication. By definition, abdication means that we've got some idea of what's going on, but we choose to ignore it. We choose to bury our heads in the sand and just let it all go on around us. John Coleman, Dr. John Coleman, writing his book, The Committee of 300, which he published first in 1986. He republished it in 2006 with some updates. But in that book in 1986, he states that one of the greatest constructs of the global corporatists is the New Age movement, because it creates spiritual narcissism, where people believe that all they've got to do is go on their own selfish spiritual journey, and I'm all right, Jack. I'm all right, Jack. It's like Gurdjieff said, you know, writing in the early 20th century, Gurdjieff said the most selfish spiritual journey is the way of the monk. Because all they've got to do is go and lock themselves away in cloisters, pray 5 times a day, keep silent, and everything else is taken care of. It's time. That's a process that we have to go through, for sure. We have to go through that process. But the real challenge is, once we've been through that process, to bring out the learning, the wisdom that we've gained while going through that process and deciding how we can actually bring that to bear. And the last one is willful ignorance. And they don't care. These guys don't care which of those categories we fall into, whether it's apathy, abdication, or willful ignorance. The only thing that matters to them is that we do fall into one of those categories, because then we are no threat whatsoever. We are no threat. We will not put up any kind of challenge, active or passive. Something has to happen. What we've got is completely unsustainable. Now, if we continue down the existing paradigm, unless we actually get off of our butts and find a way to work through this, and it doesn't have to be aggressive, it can be the way in which the former Soviet Empire was brought down, which is massive non-compliance. Massive non-compliance. The Soviet Empire, or the Soviet people, the Russian people, brought down the Soviet Empire. It didn't happen overnight. But the only people paying taxes in 1989 were on the Soviet government's payroll. And it wasn't, ultimately, of course, it wasn't enough to even pay them. We have to get creative here. But there's also something else occurring. Because in addition to my research in deep geopolitics over the last 12, 15 years now, I've also been researching the knowledge and the wisdom retained by the indigenous peoples around the planet. And in fact, I was just literally coming up to the end of a 6-month stint in Central America, where I'd been studying Mayan mythology and Mayan cosmology prior to 9/11. I was always scheduled to leave Central America on September the 15th of 2001. Remarkable coincidence, of course, that was exactly the day when flights reopened back into the US. I was on one of the first flights out of Belize on September the 15th and flew back to Europe. And in fact, I landed back in Europe on the morning of September the 17th, and that was really the first time I'd been back in Europe for nearly 14 years. Last year, I went to spend some time with the Cuero in Peru. Now, this was something that I'd been wanting to do for quite some time, because I'd actually been following the work of a guy called Alberto Villoldo, who'd been working with the Cuero for the last 35 years or so. Now, the Cuero came out of the high Andes in the early 1960s. And everybody in Peru believed that the Cuero had been murdered by the conquistadors in the 16th century, because they'd been chased up into the high Andes. The conquistadors returned, but the Cuero didn't. Then in the 1960s, they emerged. And they emerged because they had a knowledge, an insight, a prophecy that they wanted to share with the people of the lower world. And I wanted to hear it for myself. I wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were. It was a remarkable experience. I actually broke my ankle on my first night there, which proved to be a godsend, because it was because of my broken ankle that I ended up spending so much time, quality time, in the company of 3 of the Cuero. But primarily, the issue that I really wanted to speak to them about was their prophecy that we are about to enter a period that is going to be truly life-changing for the whole of humanity. And what they talk about are the solar storms. The solar storms that are due to kick in October of this year and continue right through until May of 2013. So we have a 17-month period of incredible solar activity. And what the Quero believe, and by the way, they're not the only indigenous peoples on the planet who believe this. In fact, Andrew Collins has been researching a similar issue revolving around the star system of Cygnus. What the Quero believe is that this extreme solar activity is going to trigger what we have been told is junk DNA. And it's literally going to change the whole way in which we relate to our perception of reality. But they say it's not a done deal yet. It's not a done deal. We have to participate in this process. And they make the observation that there are some critical factors if we want to maximize the opportunity that we are about to be presented with. By the way, my opinion has already started, but one of the key elements, they say, is that we must participate to the best of our ability in bringing about the changes in the physical realm that we believe we need to see. We cannot just sit back and assume that the solar activity is going to take care of everything and all the ills that we've created. We've got to participate. The other aspect that we have to get involved with is that we must visualize, we must find the time and create the opportunity to visualize the type of future that we want to see. But this is a very, very interesting part of what they have to say, because they say that we must find the time, we must spend the time and visualize the future, but we must avoid having and creating an existential commitment to a particular future, because any future that we visualize right now is going to be constrained by our current perception of reality. Their observation is that if we put the effort into visualizing the type of future that we'd like to see, as bounds of perception move outwards, what we will find is that we will find that things unfold in front of us and actually enable us to make even more contribution to bringing about the changes in the physical realm. And I'm sure that if you actually stop and think about it, many of you could actually give examples of where that has occurred. I mean, I know that I can. It's truly remarkable. It's one of those things, we can't explain it by reductionist Newtonian science. But, you know, when you know something works repeatedly and you know how to bring that about, then why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? And what we've got to do also, we've got to avoid getting caught up in bullshit, philosophical minutiae. The only thing right now on this planet that should concern us is whether each individual's underlying philosophy is benign and benevolent towards humanity or not. The rest is mere detail. And that detail can be debated ad infinitum. The focus right now needs to be on whether or not we are benign and benevolent towards humanity or not. And that's what we're facing right now. This is truly a battle for souls. And the Quero absolutely believe that this is perhaps the greatest opportunity that has been presented to humanity since we were created, in whatever way, shape or form you believe that to have happened. But we have a great opportunity here. But anybody who thinks that we can just sit back and let it all happen is unfortunately delusional. We've got to participate in that process. You know, we are about to go through a massive shift. And as I said at the end of the first half of the evening, everything that is occurring, it may seem as though, you know, it's a nightmare. But let me tell you, the deeper the nightmare, the greater the opportunity. And it's up to us to embrace that opportunity. And who knows where it's going to go? I have anybody who tells you how this is going to play out, well, it's a vision. We don't know how this is going to play out. And in my opinion, I believe, however we think it's going to play out, it's actually going to be a damn sight more amazing. It's going to be a hell of a ride. Rudolf Steiner, nearly 100 years ago, made this observation. He said, "He who would create the new must be able to endure the passing of the old in full tranquility." Which means, basically, that we just got to prepare ourselves in the best possible way we can to be able to deal and embrace any situation. Which is why, on the physical plane, it's so important to alleviate those basic needs and fears like shelter, food, water. Because once we've dealt with those, then we can, truly move forward and focus on the real issues. We're perhaps at the point, almost at the point in the alchemical process of solvere coagulare. Now, unfortunately, solvere coagulare would indicate that we've got to completely destroy to be able to rebuild. Whether or not we have to go through complete destruction to be able to rebuild depends, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the Quaero, on how much effort that we're actually prepared to put into that. And I saw this a couple of days ago. It's a new take on an old theme, but I think it's extremely poignant. If I didn't believe that we're going to work through this, because the collective creativity of humanity is truly amazing. I mean, even this event here is a classic example. This superb community that appears out of nothing, with all the engineering involved, the sound, the light, and all from natural resources, the water supply. It's incredible. When the shift really hits the fan, it is incredible what we are capable of doing. The great tragedy is that sometimes we have to be up to here before we start to actually make the effort to swim our way out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Can I just say that if you're interested in some of the other subjects I talk about, then I do have some DVDs over here. Hitting me probably tomorrow now, because it's getting a bit dark. But also, can I maybe pass this around? If you thought what I had to say is useful, it's really important that we use whatever mediums we can to get this message out. Right now, Edge Media is one of those mediums on Sky Channel 200. So if you feel that you can help in any small way towards keeping Edge Media on the air, can I sort of maybe slip this down in the middle here and just leave you to do whatever you will with it, preferably leave it behind. But I can't see anybody here, but unless anybody's in any great hurry to leave, I'm happy to take a few questions.
Are you planning to commit suicide at any point in the near future?
Absolutely not. I tell you what, this is going to be a hell of a ride, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. The Illuminati cards. Okay, let me give you my bottom line. You can get hold of them. There's actually a distributor, I think, in Northampton. The base set is about 30 quid, and then you can buy the add-on sets. Okay, let me tell you. And I don't sell them. And by the way, they're a lot cheaper right now than they were about 3 months ago, when everybody realized that Mitchell Coombs was latching onto them. Let me tell you, this is my take. Okay, the CIA raided the offices of Steve Jackson in 1990. Steve Jackson, I think, was pissed off by that raid because they took all his computers, and I mean, they obviously just clearly want to know what he was working on. But there was nothing particular at that time, and he got all the computers and everything else back. But Jackson is a very creative guy. I mean, he'd been in the games industry for 15 years at that point. And I think he and his team sat down and thought, these motherfuckers, these guys think they can just walk in here and take everything. Let's create a game based on the Illuminati. Let's expose them for what they are. And they came up with a game, and it was 5 years because the game didn't come out until 1995. And of course, a lot of people are going, well, you know, the CIA must have told Jackson what to put in those cards. I think it's the other way around. I think Jackson is completely innocent. He's not in any way, shape or form involved in any way in this agenda. But I think what he has done is inadvertently created the scenarios for these events. And I think these guys are actually using the cards to form the basis for whatever it is that they're going to stage next. That's only a hypothesis. But I certainly don't, in any way, shape or form, believe that Jackson is directly involved. John?
But Ian, you said in previous talks that it's more powerful for them if they tell us exactly what they're going to do.
Absolutely.
Which I think I would disagree with you there, because I think perhaps they use that as perhaps just another scenario. Perhaps they used his vehicle with cards as a way of telling us what they were going to do.
Absolutely. And John, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I absolutely stand by that. You know, there is no doubt in my mind that these guys believe that when they tell us what they're going to do, which is why actually we're seeing more and more truth in the mainstream media. I mean, it's still mixed with a whole bunch of crock. But the reason we are seeing more and more truth is because when they do put their game plan out there and there's no reaction, then they perceive in their belief system that that gives them even greater power. And a classic example was the hoarding on the side of the bus in Tavistock Square on 7/7. If you haven't seen this before, go look at it. You'll still find the pictures on the web. But the bus bomb, and I'm going to use that word extremely loosely because, you know, the blast was so powerful that it blew. It was on the top deck, it blew out the back of the bus, it blew down the top deck onto the lower deck, it blew the roof off, and yet there's 13 people, at least 13 people, in a photograph taken in the immediate aftermath with not a hair out of place. Not a piece of clothing out of place. You know, the blast was so powerful that it went from the back of the bus, blew off the roof, blew out the front destination board, and yet at least 13 people on the top deck with not a mark on them. I'm not suggesting that I know what happened. It's just, once again, that the physical evidence doesn't support the official version of events, which is why there will never be a formal hearing into what occurred that day. But if you look at the photographs of the bus, what you'll see on the side of the bus, on the near side of the bus, is a hoarding for a film called The Descent. And what it says on the bus is, outright terror, bold and brilliant. And this is, you see, you know, people are going, wow, you know, you didn't know. And this is what they're doing, is to those of us that know what's going on, those of us that know what's happening. And I actually gave a presentation, it's called the 9/11-77 Connection. It was recorded at the exact same time that Jean-Charles de Menzies was being assassinated at Stockwell Tube Station on July 22nd, 2005. And I was pointing this out in that presentation. And I was saying, you know, what these guys are doing, they're giving us the finger. They're basically saying, here you go, guys, we know there's a number of you out there who know exactly what we're doing. In fact, Dr. John Coleman, writing in his book, Committee of 300, published in 1986, he makes the statement. He said that his sources tell him that those who perpetrate their pernicious agenda know that there will always be 13%, where he gets the number from, I don't know, but he says that there will always be 13% of the population who know what they're doing. But it's not enough. And their challenge is to make sure that that 13% don't actually get in touch with each other. Well, of course, the internet has certainly changed that. And Facebook has been a tremendous contributor. But already they're starting to shut down Facebook now, and you know, we can't post certain news reports that contest the official version of events, all part of the control mechanism. But what these guys are doing when they put things up like outright terror, bold and brilliant, is saying, you know, there's nothing you can do. There's not enough of you to be able to bring about any real change, and we can perpetrate this kind of act with complete impunity. But as Brzezinski acknowledged last year, you know, and thanks to the internet, and let's make use of it while we got it, more and more people are starting to acknowledge. Nick?
Yeah, could you just go over a bit more detail, the major thing you said about the Fukushima reactor, that possibly the Israeli Variant Systems company, with its camera inside the reactor that might have in some way been what triggered the explosive. And you said some sort of explosion took place too early, or earlier than it should have done.
Well, that's certainly the hypothesis of Jim Stone. I would encourage you, go Google Jim Stone Fukushima, and you can read his excellent research on this. And Jim Stone has produced the evidence, which was the blast actually occurred just a little bit too soon, which of course is exactly what occurred on 9/11, according to William Rodriguez, who was in the basement, and some bombs that exploded in the basement fractionally before the plane actually hit. Again, we see the pattern. Okay, now listen, it's getting late. I'm thirsty. I'm sure some of you are thirsty. I'm going to be around this area tomorrow, so if you want to come and have a chat and kick over anything that I've discussed this evening, or take a look at the DVDs, which I'll have out tomorrow morning, I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And just while you're leaving, I just want to play this. This is actually a T-Mobile advertisement, but from last year that was recorded at Heathrow Airport. And my daughter actually alerted me to this because she was actually coming through Heathrow when they were recording it, and she was absolutely stunned by it. So just take a look at this. This is how it should be. It's love and compassion that will see us through this.
Hi, I just wanted to say something. I've been working down in South America for 10 years, and one of my concerns is bringing about demand for gold, because I've been working about the gold mines. and seeing what's happening to the indigenous people from the new demand for gold is, I mean, it's terrible. To one wedding ring, they have to move 1 ton of earth and a huge amount of cyanide. So we've got the earth becoming more and more polluted through our demand for gold. So I think we really also need to look at that balance of, is that okay for us to be all right? And others are